In the investment terms, it's so clear to me what you're talking about, but I'm kind of surprised why is for you like the view of the ocean is, if I understood correctly, is weird to take into account in a price?
No, it's just, I think it's just a fact. If in the example I gave of where my son is living, he lives in an apartment facing the ocean, right in front of him is a beach. But the developer who bought the beach is about to build a block of flats in front of him.
Yeah.
So all he will see the back is the back of an apartment building.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what that's not the value he put on his apartment was linked to the fact when he got in his apartment, he can look out and see France across the way. He didn't buy the apartment with the view with the idea he'd look out on the back of an apartment building.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
So at least he's actually renting it, but I'm making it out that he bought it because it's reflected in the rent he pays.
Yeah.
So if the value of the apartment block or the particular apartment is linked to the fact now I have nothing in front of me except the beach and the ocean and then France, people would pay more for that than if they could have a street and a house and look at someone's brick wall. That's just the case. But that would be the case whether land had value or not.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is you can put just as I said that the topsoil on the farm can be given a value, I think, right? The subsoil not, but the topsoil where someone's being productive, right? You can put a value on this ultimately, and even maybe quantitatively. That's not giving land value. That's just valuing the value created by the farmer.
Yeah.
You can similarly do this. If I build a house facing away from the sun, the value of that house, even if the land has got zero value, even if the house is just the value of the cost of building it, right? I could sell that more expensively if I've turned it to the sun and never turned it away.
Yeah.
Here I speak as a builder, and I've often increased the value of clients' houses, not in the building, but in when I've converted buildings for people. A typical thing would be I would put a window in the wall, which is between them and where the sun sets. It's a small thing, but if you maximize the amount of sun coming into a building, the building feels bigger, and the value goes up, not of the land.
Yeah.
But these are ephemeral. The bricks are still going down in, still depreciating. But if I could see through the bricks to the sunset, I would pay more for this house than the one where I can't. So this is independent of if you could work out some calculation whether the land value is put to zero underneath, right? It still operates. And so I'm just saying that, but I could maybe make the example clearer. I often give the example, if you buy a house, even with land's got value or no value, if you buy a house and you live in it, this is your primary asset and you're going to live in it. So in doing that, you are both a landlord and a tenant. But because you are landlord and tenant, you don't recognize the difference. And so you will spend far more on the house that you own and live in than you will ever spend on the other house you bought in order to rent.
Yeah.
So if you're in a position of buying a house to live in and buying a house to rent, when someone says they don't like the taps, you say, well, what's wrong with the tap? Water comes out of it. You mean you've seen a new tap on the market and you want to have new taps? Well, do that in your own house, or you can do that in my rented accommodation. Just understand it becomes my tap at your expense.
Yeah. So
that's important, because if you compare the economics of the house you own, if you think, oh, there's a nice new kitchen design somewhere in some advertisement, you might say, oh, well, we're bored with this one. You do it out of your astrology. Let's have a different color, right? And you'll spend $10,000 on refitting the kitchen, which worked perfectly before. It's just that you got tired of it or something. And you put no ceiling on the amount of which you, apart from your disposable income, you put no ceiling on how much you will invest in your house.
Yeah.
The house you bought to rent, no way.
Yeah,
right?
For sure. Yeah.
You paint it white and you say you can rent it and it comes back white.
Yeah.
Do what you like in between, but white is, and I've I've managed 22 houses for a housing association. So I know how this works in the kind of more brutal role of being a landlord.
Mm.
You know, you can do whatever you like to my house, but at your expense, not at my expense.
Yeah.
And so when you come into that, you start to see, oh, there's the economics that the landlord thinks about, and there's the economics of the tenant. But the tenant has no right to the land. He's just on some, you know, even legally, you can come on we could find it happens like in Iceland or somewhere, where suddenly an island is created out of nowhere by some geographical event or some volcanic event. And let's say it happens outside of any known territory. Let's imagine this. We then have the problem, whose land is this? Since there's nobody on it, there's nobody to get rid of, there's nobody to conquest, you know, we've got bare land. So whose is it, right? And if you start there, there's nobody on there saying it's already mine and therefore I can rent you a bit of it.
Yeah.
So the origin of rent in economic terms is absent. There's nothing to rent.
Yeah.
That rent begins when someone already owns the land and you want to have use of it, exclusive of him. So if you start with pure land, there's no rent. On pure land, the rent is zero, because what am I paying for, right? How did you make this island out of nowhere? What have you done? Yeah, no cost. So there is no value. You can't argue any value. You could argue the value, you got here first and you stuck your flag on it and therefore it belongs to you, but you know, it's not going to fly. So if you make a pristine image like this, land has no value and there's no reason for it to have value, right? Now we have the problem, how do we allocate this land among the 10 billion people on the planet who have an equal right to it, right? And then you start saying, well, okay, we can divide it up into lots and maybe we sell the land in, you know, square hectares or something, or whatever calculation we use. And so that gives me a piece of land, and now maybe I can build on it if I have another permission to build on it, because I don't have that permission by right, right? So now I get permission to build on it for some reason, but that's going to be not if you block the view of everybody else. There's lots of things come in here. And now I build on this. And in fact, I build a house bigger than I need. So I split it into 3 apartments. And I say I have the top one because I want the nice view and it's my house. And I rent out the bottom 2. Because in fact, the rent I charge them will cover my mortgage. This is going on all the time. But I will change my kitchen when I feel like it. My tenants will never change their kitchen, right? Unless the tap breaks, then it's my problem.
Yeah.
So they don't, you know, so I, as the house owner, first I own the land, then I own the right to build a house, then I own the house, and then I own the right to split it up. But when I give you an apartment to rent, this is not your house, no way whatsoever. You can stay in here as long as we've agreed. So you get levels of land ownership, leasing, licensing. You know, you can do it by the year, but you know, if I want to run a prostitute, it'll be by the hour that I rent my apartment out. Meaning, the legal arrangements get layered. So the shorter you need a space, the shorter your legal arrangement, the shorter your right to be there. Pay by the hour. If you pay the hour, you get the right to ask for another hour, but not if you haven't paid. And or at least where usually a kind of capital sum is involved. You don't buy the house, you tie up a large sum of capital with me, but you get to live in it for 10 years. You still don't own the house or what's underneath it. You bought something like a lease, it's much more ephemeral, but you've paid a capital sum, which you borrowed from the markets in order to have the right to be you know, to live in this apartment with me above and someone else below you for 10 years unmolested. I would never buy an apartment myself. I don't get why I would buy something like that. I would rent an apartment, no problem. But if I'm going to tie up capital, I don't get buying up a lease. I just don't understand it, right? So I'm saying this because if you go in the real estate world, even in the world that thinks land has a value, if you unpack it, it doesn't. You know, and the only reason it has a value, like in the town I live in, is a good example. In the 17th, 18th century, I think the land on which this town is now built was acquired by some, I think they were even Huguenots from France across the way, something like this. And they acquired a huge area of land, which subsequently they've sold off in bits into what is now the town of Folkestone. But buy a house in Folkestone, freehold, right? And it will have in the actual land here belongs to the lord of the manor. And if you want to put your washing out on a Sunday, you have to have his written permission. Nobody pays attention to this. It won't ever be enforced, but it could be enforced. Because even though you think you bought your house outright, the guy who actually owns all the land underneath your house, who demised it away from himself, retains certain rights. And they can be, you can pretend they don't exist, they're archaic, but if he wants to, he could come and ask you to take your laundry off the line because it's Sunday. And it's not his problem. You didn't read the very small print. So when you go into these things in detail, I would say in most countries, you will come upon the fact that land only has a value if the land I want to be on is previously occupied. But that doesn't give the land value. That gives a value to previously occupying. You know, or if you go and conquer a land, you're not going to buy their land, but very happily you've got an asset for nothing.
Yeah.
You know, and now we can start the whole British Empire game that you just acquire other people's assets for no cost, but on your balance sheet you have a huge capital gain. You know, they have a huge capital loss if you do it in accounting terms. But so you can see in very normal financial analytical terms, land has no value. You know.
Yeah.
And I think going forward, if you want to be serious in your analysis of modern financial situations, because they're so dependent on this fiction, on this misdescription, that in the end you're going to have to better describe the situation simply to maintain your portfolio. I mean, it's really like that. Otherwise, your portfolio will be constantly overestimated in value. And this was the problem of 2008. 2008 took the whole world onto one financial plane or one financial event, and you couldn't firewall yourself. When Argentina had a problem in 2000, there was an expression: we need to immunize. We need to, I can't find the word now, but make sure the Argentine economy is nothing connected to anything else. We need to kind of pass it away from ourselves, pretend we're not connected to it. But in 2008, that proved those days are over. There's no financial event in any country in the world which will not impact the rest of the world economy. Even China, when Evergreen, I think it's Evergreen, that may be the ship, but there's a huge property investment company in China, which is, I think, pretty much belly up. Well, why would the Chinese Communist Party, the absolute opposite of property speculation, be so dependent on property, and they've permitted it and so on, if it's not got a hand in the till anyway. And now that property is so speculative, its value is heading for zero, right? So even the Chinese Communist Party, right, speculates in real estate.
So, Christopher, can you describe in a way how, if we understand that land is not a commodity, it has zero value, how does it look like? Can you give us I can say that just as a leading thought, perhaps that obviously if you use something that's actual, that's probably a step in the right direction. And when you don't use something and you just accumulate and you invest the excess capital you have in more land, that's probably a wrong direction. But apart from that, or in addition to that, can you give us some hints how it looks like if we realize this misdescription?
I don't know whether I can say anything I haven't already said, but let me give you another example. In the field of development, real estate development, I'm not a big developer. I have done development, but I'm not a serious developer, but I know enough about it, how it works. And that, so again, we have the example here on my beach, and a local guy bought the beach. Even the way he bought the beach was, he worked a situation, so he got to buy the beach. In my view, You don't sell the beach of a town to one person. No way. But anyway, he got to buy the beach, the town's beach. And then he got planning consent to build 1,000 apartments along the beach. Well, for me, that's kind of weird. But anyway, he did that because he works the system, and the system is how it is. So I'm not knocking him particularly, although kind of. And then he, in my view, he ran into the classic problem. In development, you buy an empty piece of land, you get it rezoned, and then you sell it. So a real developer is only buying land at a certain value, first gets it rezoned if it's, gets the zoning up to residential or whatever the higher value is. That's a zoning. That's not economic. That's just doing deals with the politicians, to rezone my area of land so it can be built on for housing. Then the value of that land has gone from here to there.
Yeah.
And normally a developer says, okay, now I'm selling that and I'm out. A real developer, right? And you sell it to someone whose business is to come in and build houses profitably. But that's not the same thing, because the value of the real estate is only going up because of the assumption we all make that it will go up, because if it doesn't, we've all got a problem. So we all buy into this idea that not only does land have a value, but it's permanently going upwards. This is really important to keep in mind. And so a developer comes in, and on this rising assumption, he comes in here, he gets it rezoned or gets permission to build something which was never there before. And now the value of that land has gone up from here to there. And then he cashes out. The guy who borrowed money to pay him cash has now built in a problem, because this increase in value is fictitious. But he's now paid for it in cash. So for him, it's very real. And the money he's borrowed, at whatever percent, it's getting more and more real that he bought something didn't have any value. And so he sells out to the next person whose business it is to build houses in a development. And in a development, there's a big difference. When you're building houses, one house or a whole real estate development, there's a difference in the business or the economics of developing the site, completing it, and then selling it on. And so there are people who come in at this point after they buy from the developer. They make their money because that's their skill set in paying $1 million for the bricks and the labor and selling that for 2 million. And then they're out. They sell the house on. And so the person who buys the house, finally he's cashed in. He's got all this fakeness in his balance sheet, and now it's real.
Yeah.
So just the distinction you make between a pure developer, what I would call a pure developer, the builders of houses who make their money in this area, and then they sell on a completion. Well, the guy here, he's got a problem. He bought the real estate, but he couldn't find a developer. And I would say at that point, you have a problem. So he said, okay, then I will build. And I'd said, but you've never built a house in your life. Why do you pretend you can build houses, right? If you can't find someone to build, if you can't find someone to come in at this point, this is telling you not to do it, in my opinion. If you do it, you'll run into a problem. Because if there really was a market, right, someone would have come in to develop it, right? And then, he would sell it. So in my view, if you make these distinctions, they're real. If you start collapsing them, you cause problems. And so people don't want to look into this kind of analysis because they've often blurred the edges that I'm making very precise. And they do it for all sorts of reasons. But fundamentally, it's because they're all assuming land has a value and it's going up. And if you take this out of the equation, where's your motivation? Who wants to build a developer of real estate who's building, say, 50 houses? He may say he's building homes, but this is not true. He's building assets for the next people to put in play.